Hi, and welcome to the first video in the Ganesha DX tutorial series. This video is going to be an introduction to map making. We're not going to learn anything very specific, but we will look at the tools that we're going to use. We're going to look at the UI for those tools and the controls for that. We're also going to look at what components make up the maps so that you have a broad overview of what to expect when you actually start modifying and editing your content. So let's go ahead and just get started. Now, the first thing is we need some maps to edit, right? The best place to get that is, of course, the Final Fantasy Tactics disk. If you have your disk and you have a disk drive on your computer, you can simply put that PlayStation disk into your computer and open it like you would a thumb drive or another hard drive, and you will see the directory files on there. One of those directories is called maps. Just drag that onto your hard drive. However, if you don't have a disk drive, you may have to use an ISO. And if you're going to use an ISO, you need a tool called cdmage, which looks like this. We're going to open our image. Now your image may end in .iso or it may end in .bin. Either way, find that image and then choose open. The first question it's going to ask you is select image type of the file. There's a lot of them in here. The one that you want is this one, M2/2352. So we'll select that and choose open. We'll get this tree structure, and under track 1, expand this out, and you'll see a bunch of different folders, and one of them looks like exactly what we want, which is map. Now when we click on it, we'll see this working progress bar that takes a little bit of time. It may take longer or shorter, depending on your computer speed. But in here we have a bunch of files with some numbered extensions and some GNS files. This is the directory that we're looking for. So right click on this map directory, choose extract files, and you'll get this dialog box. Don't worry about any of this stuff. Just ignore all of these settings, okay? All you need to do is worry about where you're extracting your files to. Now I've already done this, so I'm not going to do it on this video. Do note that when you do this, it will take a number of minutes. Maybe get up and make a coffee or something. So I've already done that. We can close cdmage now, and this is what I've done. Not only have I extracted the map folder, but I extracted every folder just in case I need to find something for other kinds of modding. For map making, you'll only need the map folder though. I also recommend going to copy. Oops, I chose cut. So go to copy and right click in here and paste a copy of this file, of this folder, into here. I did that already and I called it map_vanilla backup. And the reason for this is you want to work in this folder, and if you mess something up, or if you delete something, or if you accidentally move it into another directory, then lose it or whatever, you'll always have the original vanilla files easily accessible. You don't have to do this. You can always open cdmage again and grab the images off of your ISO or pull them right off your disk. That's okay too. It's just that process is a little time consuming and it can get kind of old doing that a lot if you make those kind of mistakes often, which I have made those mistakes kind of often, so now I've learned to just keep a backup of my map folder. So let's take a look into this map folder, and what do we see? Well, first of all, we see a lot of numbered files. See .8, .9, .11, and we see some files in here called .gns. If you look at the name of the file without the extension, we have, for example here, map002, and all of these files start with map002. And as you scroll through here, you'll notice that there's a lot of files like this, map036, map036, and so on. So if we select all of the files that say map036, we'll see that a bunch of these files have a numbered extension on the end, and one of them has a GNS file. This is the case for every map. All of these files make up map036. Same is true with map37. We have a numbered series of numbered extensions and one GNS. And the same with map38, a bunch of numbered extensions and a .gns. So each of these numbered extensions are called resource files. They contain the texture data, the lighting data, the mesh data, the polygons, all of the different aspects that make up your map. They're all encoded into these various files. And then the GNS file is sort of like a table of contents for all of those files. It tells the Final Fantasy Tactics game engine which of these files to use in which situations. In fact, Ganesha DX also uses GNS to inform us of that information. So let's go ahead and take a look at Ganesha DX. Now, Ganesha DX is our main map editing program. You can download this from various sources, including the Final Fantasy Tactics tool wiki page, or off of romhacking.net, or off of the GitHub. I'll include a link to a direct download from the GitHub on the video description. It's just a zip file. You unzip it to a folder, and you'll get a bunch of these files, and all you need to do is run GaneshaDx.exe. So let's go ahead and run that. Here we go. I'm going to move this out of the way. This is the main tool that we're going to use for editing maps. We have the ability to open a map, and then there's a bunch of stuff that's grayed out. We cannot create new maps yet. This is still an alpha program, and part of the restriction of using this alpha program is that you have to start with an existing map. It's a little bit annoying, but in future versions of Ganesha DX, this will probably change. For now, let's open up a map. Now, my directory is already set to my map directory, the one that I just showed you where I extracted my files. You will have to navigate this yourself because it won't know where you put those files. So find where you put those files, and you'll see that all that's in here are the GNS files. Those .11s and .13s and .8s and whatever, that's not in here. We only open GNS files. So let's go ahead and open one GNS file. We're going to open up map 005. And this probably looks familiar to you. I know that it looks very familiar to me because I spent a long time on this map trying to protect Malik from running into a sword. And I'm sure that you ran into the same situation. So let's talk about real quick what's going on here. The general UI is that we have our menu bar up here, which includes our typical options that you would find in any application, right? Our edit, selection, view, help, file, open, save, all of that stuff is very, very typical for software these days. On the right side, we have a series of tabs that relate to the different elements of our map. The default that you'll see when you open a map is the map tab. We'll talk about this all in a moment. In fact, we'll talk about each of these tabs in a moment, but first I want to give you kind of an idea of how to interact with this app. First of all, the right mouse click button, if you hold that down, we can pan it, and if you hold the middle mouse button, we can rotate. You can rotate in all 360 degrees. Scrolling the mouse wheel will zoom you in and out. If you would like, you can go to Preferences and click this button that says Swap Camera Buttons. What this does is now right click will rotate and middle mouse will pan. Additionally, if you are working on a device or using a mouse that does not have a middle mouse button, where right click normally pans, if you hold Alt while right clicking, you can now rotate just as the middle mouse button does. So hold Alt and it'll change it to rotate. Not Alt is panning. I will say that it's a lot easier to use a mouse with a middle mouse button. That's the main controls. You also can use the arrow keys. If you press up or down, you'll see that we get these two angles. These two angles mirror exactly in game the two angles that you see when you press the shoulder buttons. This is the standard one, and then if you press up, you get this sort of more elevated look, and left and right will snap our rotation to the 4 rotation degrees that you see in game. So by using the arrow keys, left, right, up, and down, you can get all 4 exact views that you would see in game. This can be very helpful when you're making your map so that you know exactly what the player is seeing when they're playing your map. And that's mostly it for overview controls. So let's take a look at the different aspects of making maps. The first aspect is your polygon layer. This is basically just a 3D model of your map. The interesting thing about polygons is that they affect the gameplay in no way whatsoever. When your character is standing here, they don't know that they're standing on a chimney just because of the polygon information. All of this is entirely cosmetic and plays no effect on the game at all. So what does then? When we look at the terrain layer, you'll see all of this checkerboard pattern. This is actually what the AI and the UI interacts with. In fact, in the core engine has no idea about anything other than this terrain layer. And if we click here, you'll see that our surface type for this terrain is set to chimney. We have a bunch of properties for each of these cells on our terrain layer. We can change the slope, we can change the height, and we can change the surface type, among other things, such as making it unpassable and unselectable, which acts as like kind of a block that the unit can't walk into. We'll talk definitely more about polygons, terrain, textures, everything in future videos. This is just an overview. The important takeaway here is that this terrain layer, if I reduce the polygon transparency in the UI, this has no effect on the game. You can see that this is all that the game actually knows about, is this terrain layer. Everything else is cosmetic. So all of this polygon stuff is cosmetic, and part of that cosmetic element is that we have textures. Each polygon has its own texture. We have our UV map. We have a bunch of texture properties over here. And finally, the last layer, if you will, of maps is the map state. So we'll talk about this current state in a moment. This is the most complex aspect of it. But here we have background colors, which, as you might suspect, changes the background colors. And you can change these to any color that you want. So if you want this spooky dark thing, you can have that. And then we have lighting. We have ambient lighting and 3-directional lights. We can change our ambient lighting to, say, red, and you can see how it all takes on a reddish tint. Green takes on a greenish tint. Usually the ambient lighting is a little more subtle. Then we have these 3 like chalk cue objects. These are directional lights. You can see that as I change the light's elevation, this object moves and also lights up our environment. Let's change this to a nice red solid color so that as we rotate this around our model, we can see how different polygons are being lit up red depending on the position of this light. And like I said, you have 3 of these. You have 3 of these spotlights. And then finally you have polygon counts. We'll talk about this more in polygons, but each polygon type has a max number of polygons that can fit into that type. Again, we'll talk about this later. So now here's the complex part. There's the concept of map states. So I'm sure that you remember while playing the game that you have sometimes you go to a map and it's daytime, other times you go to the same map and it's nighttime, or maybe it's raining, maybe it's nighttime and raining. All of these are different map states. So let's take a look at what makes up our state. It's made up of 3 properties called your arrangement, the time of day, and the weather. So arrangement can be primary and secondary. The time can be day or night, and the weather can be none, a none alternate, which is often used for, say, dawn and dusk. Or you can have a normal weather, a strong weather, or heavy weather. And typically this is for maps that rain. If you change this to normal, the map will be raining in-game. Or rather, this will be the state that's loaded when it's raining in-game. So, as you can see, we have 5 weather conditions, 2 time of day conditions, and 2 arrangement conditions, which makes a total of 20 different possible states that your map can have. For example, you can have primary day rain, primary night rain, secondary day rain, secondary day strong rain, whatever. So there are 20 different combinations of these states, which actually ends up creating 20 unique states. If you are making maps for, say, Final Fantasy Tactics Battleground on Twitch, you don't have to worry about any state other than primary day none. That Battleground only uses that first state. It never uses any other state besides that. So let's take a look at Manage Map Resources here. And we have this scary Excel looking grid setup. It's okay, hopefully we'll be able to explain actually what this is. First of all, we'll see that we have a column that says File, and these should look pretty familiar. We have map 005.8, map 005.11, .14, .17, and hey, we remember that, right? We remember when we looked in our folder structure, that's exactly what we saw. So if we go down here to map 005, we have 7, 8, 10, 11, 13, 14, 16, 17, etc. We have a lot of those here. But it's kind of skipping every other one, right? We have 8, 11, and 14, but here we have 7, 8, 10, 11, 13, 14. Where's 7, 10, and 13? So remember earlier I had mentioned that these are resource files. Some of them are textures and some of them are meshes. This only shows us the meshes, okay? We know the difference between mesh and texture resource files because texture resource files are 128K all the time when you look at the file size, whereas mesh files are much smaller. And they can be any size. For example, this is 38, this one is 1K, this one's 51K, this one's 10K, and so on. But texture images, texture resources are always 128K. So this is only listing the mesh file resources and not the texture resources. If we look here, we can see which resource is being loaded for this state. We can see the texture file is loading 005.7 and the mesh file is .8. If we change this over to night, well, these updated. Now it's using 0.23 for the texture and 0.24 for the mesh. So the takeaway here is that each of these files links to a specific state configuration. This 7 and 8, as we know, are primary day none for weather, 7 and 8. We change weather to none alt. Well, 10 and 11 are used for primary day none alt. For normal, 13 and 14 are used for primary day normal. This exact configuration uses these specific files. So let's take a look at the map resources again. We can see that map 005.8, its arrangement is primary, day, none, just like we saw. We also see that it's got a check mark under primary mesh, one under palettes, one under lights and backgrounds, one under terrain, and one on texture animations. However, ones below it may or may not have check marks. The ones under lights and background, each of these has check marks for each of these different resource files, whereas the ones for texture animations do not. So what's going on here is each mesh resource contains information for the polygons, for your texture palettes, not the textures themselves, but the texture palettes, for the lights in the backgrounds, like the ones that I showed you a moment ago, for the terrain layer, and for texture animations, for palette animations, and for animated meshes. Texture animations, palette animations, and animated meshes, these two columns here, are not mandatory for maps. No maps are required to include that data. However, all maps are required to have data for your primary mesh, which makes up your polygons, for your palettes, which makes up the colors that applied to the textures, for lights and backgrounds, the backgrounds and these lights, and for the terrain layer. These four elements of a mesh resource are all required for a map, which is why these are all checked and you are unable to uncheck them. However, we can check and uncheck these here. So what's going on? Why do these not have a primary mesh? We are on right now the primary day normal state, right? Primary day normal. We're on that state. So why is primary day normal has a primary mesh even though this isn't checked? How are they using palettes even though this isn't checked? That's weird, right? So what happens is there's a fallback method where for each of these states, primary day strong, primary night normal, if there is no check mark here, if the mesh resource for that state does not have primary mesh data or palette data or whatever data encoded into it, then simply it uses the data from the initial state, which is primary day none. And we can see this in action. Let me show you. If I go to polygon and I move this polygon up, let's move it out this way too to make it easier to see, and we go on map and we change this to primary night, we'll see that this polygon stays, but these windows turned yellow, the backgrounds changed color, the lighting, well, I guess these directional lights stayed the same, but our ambient color changed, right? Let's change this back to day. Here the ambient color is this kind of brownish color that we've got kind of this muted purple and kind of olive green for the sky. When we go back to night, well, now our colors are these dark purples and dark blues with a kind of a moonlight lighting applied to it. So in this case, we see that our backgrounds and our lighting changed. Also, our palette changed. These weren't yellow before, so our palette changed, but our polygons did not change. So when we look at map resources, and now we're in primary, night, normal, the things that we knew changed, like the palettes, the lights and background, were changed, but things that we saw that didn't change, for example, the primary mesh did not change, right? So the same is true for terrain. If we look at terrain and we make a modification here, let's say move this way up. If we go to our map and change this to day, and then look back at our terrain, well, it's still up there. However, if this had a check mark under terrain, then this map would have its own terrain layer. And in fact, we'll do that. We added a checkbox for primary day normal for our terrain. And now let's take a look at our terrain layer. Oh, look at that. Terrain is small. It's only 1 bit. We can change this to, say, let's make it 10 by 10. And let's move this way up. So this is our terrain layer for this map state, which is primary day normal. This is our terrain map for it. If we change this back to primary day none and look at our terrain, well, that's the terrain that came with the game, right? We have overridden that original terrain data by adding this checkbox. So hopefully I didn't belabor this point. Hopefully this makes sense to you, that basically, to sum it all up, each state uses its own resource files, which are these .x files, and each state resource can have it and can override any of these properties that it wants. If it doesn't override those, then it will use the properties from the base, from the initial mesh state. For example, here, if we set a primary mesh for for primary day none alt, if we go here to none alt, we'll see that there is no mesh. We don't have any polygons for this arrangement. But our normal uses the same as none, right? It uses the same mesh as for none. So in this case, it's not falling back to the previous state. It's falling back to the initial state. It's falling back to whatever the very first state, which is always primary day none. Hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully I didn't confuse you more. Hopefully I didn't over-explain it. It is a very complex topic to understand, but it is an important one. Just to wrap this up, if you want texture animations added to your map, you just have to click this checkbox. Most maps are set up like this, where the primary mesh, which is the polygons, the palettes, the lights and background, and the terrain are all set, but none of this stuff is set. And you might want to add in animated meshes to your map, or palette animations or whatever to your map. All you have to do is choose the select button to check it, and then it adds it into your map. If you choose select state, it will automatically select that state. So as you can see, We're going through the various states of this map that exist. Now, one thing that you might notice here too is that all of these arrangements start with primary, whereas over here, well, there's an arrangement for secondary. If I try to click that, we get a message that says this state doesn't exist. So remember earlier when I said that sometimes there are more of these dot numbered files than other times? I think it was map 37 is a good example, right? Map 37 only has 4 resource files. 2 of them are textures, as indicated by the 128K, and 2 of them are mesh files. So let's open up mesh 37 real quick and take a look. Now, if we look at manage map resources, we see that we only have 2 states. We have primary, day, none, primary, day, none, alt. So, see the difference between the two? There's slight difference. The polygons are all the same, but you can see that maybe the texture is a little bit different. The lighting is a little bit different. The background is a little bit different. And that's exactly what we see here. We see that the lights in the background are different. So, if we choose one that's not primary day none or primary day none alt, if we choose anything else, we get an error saying this state doesn't exist. And if you try to edit this, all that happens is that you'll be editing the initial state, the first state that does exist. So we'll change to there, and this is actually what we made the change for. You'll still be able to edit it, but it won't be for that specific state. It'll be for the initial primary day none state. At this time, we are not able to add new resources to a file or to a map. So what I recommend is starting with a map that already has the number of resources that you want. If you are trying to make a map that has, you know, a day and a night state and a rainy state and all of that, look through the existing maps to find one that already has those states embedded into them. Alternatively, if you are looking to make a map on Final Fantasy Tactics Battleground where they only use the initial state, this is where I recommend using map 069. Because we see that it only has that one state. And when we look in here, map 069.gns, 7.7 and .8, 7.8 are for this one state. This is a very good map to start with when you're learning how to do map editing for Final Fantasy Tactics. That said, if you do start on a map and you find that you need a new state, we can help you in the Discord to figure out what you can do to adapt the files that you already have to another GNS. GNS editing is a little complicated at the moment, but it can be done very manually too. So it's not a problem if you get down that road. Just ask for help. That said, this covers the majority of the overview of editing Final Fantasy Tactics maps. Hopefully I didn't go on too long. I know that this video is half an hour long for an introduction. Hopefully I didn't lose you along the way. So thank you, and I hope I'll see you in the next video.